at least two books that touch directly on death, right? You've written a book, Stiffed, about cadavers, and a book, Spooked, about sort of the afterlife and ghosts, or people's attempts to
people's attempts to prove that or disprove it.
to find proof of all that. And I mean, there are, great stories, some of them humorous. I think there's a less humorous aspect of Stiffed, which is our very kind of antiseptic late 20th century, particularly in the West, attitude about bodies and death and dying. What do these say to you about contemporary attitudes about death? Did they make you feel like we're really at sea with this? And there's a view of pre-modern, societies until the 20th century had a much more organic way of dealing both with spirits and with bodies. And these areas that you've looked at are kind of the unintended consequences of trying to make both invisible, not real, not part of our story.
Our society has, to my mind, come a long way toward a healthier relationship with death. I think that there's so many more options now in terms of not only what you do with remains, yours or someone else's, but how you say goodbye and form a tribute. There's a new generation of morticians. A lot of them are women, and they are far more open to allowing the family to plan a memorial, do it in a meaningful way. I have a friend whose dad was an oceanographer, and she just planned this whole service out on the pier where he used to work, and it was meaningful to the people who worked with him and knew him and loved him. In other words, it wasn't, as opposed to like when my mom died, she had outlived most of her friends, and she wanted a Catholic, the whole enchilada, the whole mass. So there was some priest up there who hadn't seen her I don't know if he'd even met her. So it was a completely generic eulogy that we didn't participate. We weren't invited to say anything. It was just a mass, and it was nothing said was personal or was in any way about her. It was generic. And I felt that, it was what she wanted. She wanted a Catholic service, mass. But, and part of it is, I guess, on me. I should have, taken the reins and set up some sort of memorial, although it wasn't hardly anyone left to go to. It would have been just my brother and me standing around. But, I look at the difference between that kind of, to me, meaningless, although to her, I suppose, meaningful ceremony, and then more recent memorials that I've attended where people are invited into a home and sometimes invited to take something meaningful. On the bookshelf behind me here there's a book from a friend of mine died. He loved to read, and what his mom did at his memorial was invite everyone to take one of his books, and one that would maybe have meaning for you, which I love that. So I also, it's a really good book, but it's also just always makes me think of Eric. When I wrote Stiff, it was right around the time of 6 Feet Under and also CSI. So all of a sudden you turn on the television and there were bodies everywhere. There were bodies on the slab. There were bodies in funeral homes. And I think a little bit of the taboo kind of dissolved around that time and has continued to dissolve. And there's now been laws passed in Washington, Oregon, several other states allowing composting of human remains, which people find really meaningful. The one chapter I got the most email about in Stiff was about a woman in Sweden who was trying to devise machinery to basically render the body ready for composting. In other words, she didn't feel like you could just stick the whole body because it would underground, it would rot. You needed to break it into smaller pieces so there was more surface area exposed to oxygen. So it would actually compost in a way that you could then take that material and plant something and have a plant that would grow with the remains of your family member or friend or loved one, as they say. People really responded to that, and they'd like, how can I do this? They want to do something more meaningful than embalming in a fancy coffin that some dude in a dark suit kind of pressured you to buy. That whole Jessica Mitford American Way of Death scenario where it was taken away from us, and they'd come at you when you're in a very vulnerable state. And there was just a lot, to my mind, wrong with that. And there are so many more options now, legally and in terms of businesses that people, I mean, you can have your loved one's remains put into a dildo. You can have them fired into space. You can have them put in a duck decoy. You can, whatever you want to do, you can do now. And I think that's healthy. I mean, there are those that don't. I mean, when this book came out in the UK, one of the reviewer for, I forget which paper, said stiff success in America is a sign of cultural, what did he say? Cultural decay, something like that. I mean, there are those who yeah.
Pun unintended on that one.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, cultural decay, cultural rot. So not everybody agrees with me. I don't know. I like to chip away at those taboos. I like transparency. I like, because if something's taboo, there's guilt and shame involved, and that's never good for anybody.